12-year-old Marcus had learned to survive on the streets of downtown Chicago, his nimble fingers able to fix anything from broken toys to abandoned electronics. What he didn't expect was that his simple act of kindness toward an elderly woman whose wheelchair had broken down would catch the attention of billionaire Richard Blackwood, watching from his luxury sedan. Marcus didn't know that this stranger had been searching for something real in a world full of pretense. He didn't know that helping Mrs. C. Patterson would reveal a hidden talent that would astonish everyone, and he certainly didn't know that this single moment of compassion would transform not just his life, but the lives of his 3 younger siblings who depended on him for survival. As Richard stepped out of his car, one question burned in his mind. Could this remarkable boy be the answer to everything he'd been looking for? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The autumn rain had stopped just an hour ago, leaving the sidewalks of Michigan Avenue glistening under the afternoon sun. Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind a dumpster in the alley between 2 towering office buildings, carefully sorting through the contents of his worn canvas backpack. At 12 years old, he had the weathered hands of someone who had learned to fix things out of necessity, his fingernails permanently stained with grease and dirt from countless repairs. The backpack contained his most precious possessions. A small toolkit he had assembled piece by piece over the months, several lengths of wire in different gauges, a collection of screws and bolts organized in an old pill container, and 3 crumpled dollar bills that represented his total savings. Marcus had been living on the streets for 8 months now, ever since the foster care system had failed him and his 3 younger siblings. The memory of that final group home still haunted him, the way the older kids had threatened his sister Luna, how the staff had seemed more interested in their paychecks than the children in their care. When he discovered that the system was planning to separate him from his siblings, placing them in different homes across the state, Marcus had made the most difficult decision of his young life. In the dead of night, he had gathered Luna, who was 10, Diego, who was 8, and little Sophia, barely 6 years old, and they had simply disappeared into the vast anonymity of the city. Now, as he checked his watch, a battered timepiece he had found in a trash bin and managed to repair, Marcus calculated that he had exactly 47 minutes before he needed to return to the abandoned warehouse where his siblings waited for him. They had made a home of sorts in the basement of the old building, a space that stayed relatively warm thanks to the building's ancient heating system that still functioned sporadically. Luna had become remarkably resourceful at stretching their meager food supplies, while Diego had appointed himself as Sophia's primary protector and entertainer, creating elaborate games and stories to keep her spirits up during the long, frightening nights. Marcus emerged from the alley and walked toward the bustling pedestrian area near Grant Park, where he had learned that broken items and small repair jobs were most likely to present themselves. His keen eyes scanned the crowd, looking for the telltale signs of mechanical distress. Someone struggling with a jammed zipper, a businessman cursing at his broken briefcase latch, or a mother dealing with a stroller that refused to fold properly. These small emergencies had become his primary source of income, as people were often grateful enough to tip him $1 or 2 for quick fixes that saved them time and frustration. The skill had developed naturally over the years, born from necessity and nurtured by an intuitive understanding of how things worked. Even as a small child in various foster homes, Marcus had been the one other kids came to when their toys broke or when they needed help with anything mechanical. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems quickly, to see how components fit together, and understand why they had stopped functioning. Social workers had noted this talent in his files, describing him as mechanically gifted and remarkably resourceful, but none had ever thought to nurture this gift in any meaningful way. As he walked, Marcus noticed the usual flow of Chicago's downtown foot traffic, business people rushing between meetings, tourists consulting maps and guidebooks, college students hurrying to classes, and the invisible population of homeless individuals that most passers-by seemed determined not to see. Marcus had learned to move through this world carefully, to appear busy and purposeful enough that security guards wouldn't hassle him. but not so polished that he attracted unwanted attention from social services or police officers who might ask uncomfortable questions about why he wasn't in school. Near the intersection of Michigan and Monroe, Marcus spotted his first potential customer of the day. A young professional woman was standing beside her car, clearly frustrated as she repeatedly pressed her key fob without result. Her car, a modest sedan that had seen better days, refused to respond to the remote lock commands. Marcus approached her with the careful politeness he had perfected over months of street-side customer service. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, keeping his voice respectful and his posture non-threatening. "I couldn't help but notice you're having trouble with your car. I might be able to help." The woman, who appeared to be in her late 20s and wore the tired expression of someone juggling too many responsibilities, looked at Marcus with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "It's okay, honey," she said, her tone kind but dismissive. "I think the battery in my key fob is just dead. I'll figure it out." "I have a small toolkit," Marcus offered, pulling his backpack around to show her. "Sometimes it's not the battery, but just a loose connection inside the remote. I could take a look in about 2 minutes, and if I can't fix it, you haven't lost anything." Something in his earnest demeanor and the professional way he spoke about the problem convinced her to give him a chance. She handed him the key fob, and Marcus immediately began his systematic approach to diagnosis. He removed the back cover, examined the battery connections, and quickly identified that one of the small metal contacts had become slightly corroded. Using a tiny piece of sandpaper from his toolkit, he carefully cleaned the contact, reassembled the device, and handed it back to her. The key fob worked perfectly on the first try, and the woman's face lit up with genuine surprise and gratitude. "Oh my goodness, that's amazing. How did you know how to do that?" "I just like figuring out how things work," Marcus replied with a modest shrug. The woman pressed $3 into his hand, thanking him profusely before driving away. Marcus carefully folded the bills and added them to his small collection, bringing his total to $6, enough to buy his siblings a decent dinner from the MC Donald's dollar menu. Encouraged by this success, Marcus continued his circuit through the downtown area. Over the next hour, he helped an elderly man whose glasses had lost a screw, earning another $2, and assisted a college student whose laptop bag had developed a broken zipper, which netted him a $5 tip when his repair proved to be permanent rather than just a temporary fix. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself near the entrance to Millennium Park, where the foot traffic was particularly heavy. Street performers competed for attention with musicians, artists, and the occasional speaker attempting to draw crowds. It was here that Marcus first noticed Eleanor Patterson, though he didn't yet know her name. Mrs. Patterson was 83 years old, but she carried herself with the dignity and determination that had sustained her through 8 decades of life's challenges. She had been widowed for 12 years, but had maintained her independence fiercely, living alone in a small apartment on the South Side and making weekly trips downtown to visit the library, attend cultural events, and simply maintain her connection to the broader world beyond her increasingly quiet neighborhood. Her wheelchair was a manual model that she had been using for 3 years, ever since a fall had damaged her hip severely enough that walking long distances had become impossible. The wheelchair represented both her limitation and her freedom, the thing that allowed her to continue living the active, engaged life she had always valued. She had learned to navigate curbs, doorways, and the sometimes thoughtless behavior of people who seemed to view her as an obstacle rather than a person. On this particular afternoon, Mrs. Patterson had been returning from the Chicago Cultural Center, where she had attended a lecture about urban architecture, when disaster struck. As she was maneuvering her wheelchair down a curb cut that was steeper than she had anticipated, the front wheel had struck a pothole with enough force to cause something critical to break. The wheelchair had suddenly become almost impossible to steer, pulling dramatically to the left, no matter how she tried to correct it. Marcus first became aware of her situation when he noticed a small crowd of people walking around something on the sidewalk, their path slightly altered, but their pace unchanged. When he looked more carefully, he saw Mrs. Patterson sitting in her wheelchair near the curb, clearly struggling with some kind of mechanical problem. She was trying to move forward, but the wheelchair kept veering sharply to the left, forcing her back toward the street. What struck Marcus immediately was not just her obvious distress, but the way that dozens of people were simply walking past her. Some glanced in her direction with expressions of mild concern, but none stopped to offer assistance. A few pulled out their phones as if considering calling for help, but then seemed to think better of it and continued on their way. The invisible barrier between Mrs. Patterson and the flowing crowd of pedestrians seemed almost physical in its impenetrability. Marcus approached her directly, his natural empathy overriding any concern about getting involved in a situation that might be complicated or time-consuming. "Ma'am, are you having trouble with your wheelchair?" he asked, kneeling down beside her so they could speak at eye level. Mrs. Patterson looked at him with surprise, both at being addressed at all and at the respectful tone of this young boy who had materialized beside her when everyone else had simply walked past. "Yes, dear," she said, her voice carrying the slight tremor of someone who was trying not to let her frustration turn into panic. "Something happened when I went over that bump back there, and now I can't make it go straight. It keeps pulling to the left, and I'm afraid I'm going to end up in the street." Marcus immediately began his systematic examination of the wheelchair, running his hands along the frame and wheels to identify the source of the problem. His trained eye quickly spotted the issue. The bolt that secured the left front wheel assembly had worked itself loose, allowing the wheel to shift position and throw off the chair's alignment. It was exactly the kind of problem that looked catastrophic to someone who didn't understand the mechanics, but was actually relatively simple to fix with the right tools and knowledge. "I think I can help you," Marcus said confidently. "One of the bolts that holds your front wheel in place has come loose. I have the right tools to tighten it up, and you should be good as new." Mrs. Patterson's relief was immediately visible, but it was mixed with amazement that this young boy not only understood what was wrong, but actually had the tools necessary to fix it. "Are you sure, dear? I don't want you to get in trouble for working on my chair." "It's no trouble at all," Marcus replied, already extracting the appropriate wrench from his toolkit. "This is actually a pretty common problem with this model of wheelchair. The vibration from rolling over rough surfaces can gradually loosen these bolts. Most people just need to check them every few months and tighten them up." As Marcus worked, Mrs. Patterson found herself studying this remarkable young man who had appeared just when she needed help most. His clothes were obviously well worn and not particularly clean, suggesting circumstances that were less than ideal. But his manner was polite and professional, and his knowledge of wheelchair mechanics seemed extensive. There was something about his focused competence and genuine desire to help that reminded her of her late husband, who had possessed the same intuitive understanding of how things worked and the same generous impulse to assist others whenever possible. "There," Marcus said, standing up and wiping his hands on a small rag he carried in his toolkit. "Try it now. It should roll straight and true." Mrs. Patterson tested the wheelchair carefully, rolling forward and then trying some gentle turns. The improvement was immediate and dramatic. The chair responded perfectly to her guidance, tracking straight when she wanted to go forward and turning smoothly when she directed it to either side. "Oh my goodness!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with genuine amazement. "It's perfect. It feels better than it has in months. How on earth did you learn to do that?" Marcus shrugged with characteristic modesty. "I just like fixing things. I'm glad I could help." Mrs. Patterson reached into her purse and extracted a $10 bill, which she pressed into Marcus's hand despite his initial protests. "You've done me an enormous service, young man. I was genuinely frightened about how I was going to get home safely. This is the least I can do to thank you." Marcus accepted the money gratefully, knowing that it would allow him to buy his siblings a much more substantial meal than he had originally planned. But, more than the monetary reward, he felt a deep satisfaction from having been able to help someone who really needed it. From having used his skills to solve a problem that had seemed insurmountable to Mrs. Patterson, but was well within his capabilities to address. "What's your name, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked, as Marcus packed up his tools. "Marcus," he replied simply. "Well, Marcus, you have a truly remarkable gift. I hope someone is encouraging you to develop it." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that comment, so he simply smiled and said he was glad he could help. Mrs. Patterson wheeled away, turning back once to wave at him before disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians that had resumed its normal flow around the spot where her crisis had occurred. What neither Marcus nor Mrs. Patterson realized was that their entire interaction had been observed by someone whose presence would prove to be far more significant than either of them could have imagined. Richard Blackwood had been sitting in the back seat of his luxury sedan, parked at the curb about 30 yards away from where Mrs. Patterson had been stranded. At 58 years old, Richard was the founder and CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a technology company that had grown from a small startup in his garage to a multinational corporation with over 15,000 employees and annual revenues exceeding $2 billion. His success had been built on his ability to identify potential, to see opportunities that others missed, and to recognize exceptional talent wherever it might appear. On this particular afternoon, Richard had been en route to a board meeting when his driver had been forced to stop due to a minor traffic jam caused by construction. While waiting for the traffic to clear, Richard had been reviewing quarterly financial reports on his tablet when something outside his window had caught his attention. Initially, it had been Mrs. Patterson's obvious distress that had drawn his notice, but what had truly captured his focus was the behavior of the crowd around her. Richard had watched with growing dismay as dozens of people had simply walked past the elderly woman, clearly struggling with her wheelchair, but receiving no assistance from anyone. The sight had triggered something deep in Richard's memory, a recollection of his own grandfather, who had spent his final years in a wheelchair and had often spoken about how invisible he felt in public spaces, how people seemed to look right through him as if he weren't there. When Marcus had appeared and immediately approached Mrs. Patterson, Richard had initially assumed the boy was simply going to offer some basic assistance, perhaps helping her navigate to the sidewalk or flagging down a police officer. What he had witnessed instead was a display of technical competence and genuine problem-solving ability that had left him genuinely astonished. From his vantage point in the car, Richard could see Marcus's systematic approach to diagnosing the wheelchair problem. The way he had examined the mechanism carefully before reaching into his backpack for tools, and the confident manner in which he had executed the repair. Even more impressive was the boy's professional demeanor throughout the interaction, treating Mrs. Patterson with respect and courtesy while demonstrating knowledge that many adult mechanics would have envied. As Mrs. Patterson had wheeled away and Marcus had begun packing up his tools, Richard had made a decision that would prove to be one of the most important of his life. "Jenkins," he said to his driver, "I need you to follow that boy. Stay far enough back that he doesn't notice, but don't lose him. I want to see where he goes." Jenkins, who had been Richard's driver for over 6 years and had learned not to question his employer's occasionally unusual requests, simply nodded and put the car in gear. As Marcus began walking away from the scene of his good deed, the luxury sedan followed at a discreet distance, its occupant consumed with curiosity about this remarkable young man who had appeared from nowhere to help a stranger in need. Marcus, completely unaware that he was being followed, made his way through several more blocks of downtown Chicago, stopping twice more to offer his services to people dealing with minor mechanical problems. Richard watched as the boy helped a businessman whose briefcase latch had broken, and then assisted a young mother whose stroller had developed a wobbly wheel. In each case, Marcus's approach was the same: polite, professional, and remarkably competent. The fees he collected were modest, but Richard could see that the boy was carefully saving every dollar. After about an hour of this wandering problem-solving, Marcus began heading toward a less affluent part of the city, walking with the purposeful stride of someone returning home. Richard instructed Jenkins to continue following, even as the neighborhoods became progressively more run down and the streets less well-maintained. They passed through areas where boarded-up storefronts outnumbered operating businesses, where the sidewalks were cracked and littered, and where the few people visible on the streets moved with the cautious awareness of those who understood that safety was never guaranteed. Finally, Marcus turned into the entrance of what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, a massive brick building that showed clear signs of having been vacant for years. Weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot, several windows were broken or boarded up, and graffiti covered much of the lower portion of the walls. Richard instructed Jenkins to park across the street, where they could observe the building without being too obvious about their presence. "What do you think he's doing in there?" Jenkins asked, voicing the question that Richard was asking himself. "I don't know," Richard replied, his mind racing through possibilities. "But I intend to find out." Richard waited for nearly 20 minutes, hoping Marcus would emerge and provide some clue about his business in the abandoned building. When the boy didn't reappear, Richard made another decision that surprised even him. "I'm going to go take a look," he announced to Jenkins. "Sir, are you sure that's wise? This doesn't look like the safest neighborhood." Richard understood Jenkins' concern, but his curiosity about Marcus had grown too intense to ignore. There was something about the boy's combination of technical skill, mature demeanor, and obvious financial need that suggested a story far more complex than a typical case of a young entrepreneur trying to earn spending money. Richard had built his fortune on his ability to recognize exceptional potential, and every instinct he had developed over decades in business was telling him that Marcus represented something truly special. "I'll be careful," Richard assured his driver. "Just stay with the car and keep your phone handy in case I need you." Richard crossed the street and approached the warehouse, looking for signs of recent activity. The main entrance was secured with a heavy chain and padlock that showed clear signs of rust and age, but as he walked around the perimeter of the building, he discovered a smaller side door that was slightly ajar. The area around this entrance showed evidence of regular use, with footprints in the dirt and debris that had been cleared away from the threshold. As Richard moved closer to the door, he began to hear voices from inside the building. The sounds were faint, but they were clearly those of children talking and laughing. Richard's curiosity intensified, mixed now with concern about what exactly he might discover. He moved closer to the door, trying to hear more clearly without making his presence known. What he heard made him stop in his tracks with amazement. "Did you bring food, Marcus?" a young girl's voice asked eagerly. "I did better than that," Marcus replied, and Richard could hear the pride in his voice. "I made $12 today, so we can have a real dinner. Luna, here's $8. Take Diego and Sophia to MC Donald's and get everyone something good to eat. Make sure Sophia gets a Happy Meal. She's been asking about the toy." "And what about you?" another voice asked, this one belonging to a slightly older girl. "I'll eat when you get back," Marcus said. "I want to work on that radio I found yesterday. I think I can get it working, and then we'll have music in here." Richard felt his heart constrict as he began to understand the situation. The voices belonged to children, multiple children, and they were apparently living in this abandoned building with Marcus acting as their provider and protector. The casual way they discussed their dinner plans, the obvious routine of their interaction, and Marcus's assumption of adult responsibilities painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. As Richard listened, he heard footsteps approaching the door. He quickly moved away from the entrance and positioned himself behind a large dumpster where he could observe without being seen. Moments later, 3 children emerged from the building. A girl who appeared to be about 10 years old, a boy who looked 8, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6. The older girl, who was apparently Luna, held the hand of the youngest child while the boy walked protectively beside them. Even from his hiding place, Richard could see that their clothes were clean but worn, and that they moved with the careful awareness of children who had learned to navigate the world without adult protection. Despite their circumstances, they seemed healthy and well cared for, chattering excitedly about their upcoming meal as they walked toward the main street. After the 3 children had disappeared around the corner, Richard heard Marcus begin to move around inside the building. Fighting every impulse that told him he was making a mistake, Richard approached the door and knocked gently. The sounds from inside the building stopped immediately, followed by a long moment of silence. Then Marcus's voice called out, tense with wariness, "Who's there?" "My name is Richard Blackwood," he replied, trying to make his voice sound as non-threatening as possible. "I saw you help the lady with her wheelchair downtown, and I followed you here. I'd like to talk to you." Another long silence followed, and Richard could almost feel Marcus calculating his options on the other side of the door. Finally, the door opened slightly, and Marcus peered out, his body positioned to slam it shut quickly if necessary. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice cautious but not hostile. Richard found himself looking into the eyes of a young man who possessed a level of self-possession and wariness that no 12-year-old should have needed to develop. "I want to understand your situation," Richard said honestly. "I watched you help that woman today, and I was impressed by your skill and your kindness. Then I followed you here, and I realized there's much more to your story than I initially understood." Marcus studied Richard's face carefully, taking in his expensive suit, his well-groomed appearance, and the general air of affluence that surrounded him. "Are you a social worker?" Marcus asked bluntly. "No," Richard replied. "I'm a businessman. I run a company that develops technology, and I'm always looking for talented people. What I saw you do today was remarkable, and I'd like to know more about you." Marcus opened the door a little wider, though he remained ready to close it quickly. "I don't understand what you want from me." "I don't want anything from you," Richard said. "I want to offer you something. But first, I need to understand your situation. Are you living here? Are those children your siblings?" Marcus's protective instincts immediately activated. "I'm not going to tell you anything that might get them taken away from me," he said firmly. The directness of this response told Richard everything he needed to know about Marcus's priorities and the nature of their circumstances. This wasn't a runaway child seeking adventure or acting out against authority. This was a young man who had taken on adult responsibilities to protect his family and was willing to face any hardship to keep them together. "I'm not interested in taking anyone away from anyone," Richard said gently. "What I saw today was a young man with remarkable abilities, taking care of people who needed help. That's something I respect, not something I want to interfere with." Marcus studied Richard's face for several more moments, apparently trying to assess his sincerity. Something in Richard's manner seemed to convince him to take a chance, because he stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can come in, but just for a few minutes. Luna and the others will be back soon, and I don't want them to be scared." Richard stepped into the warehouse and immediately understood why Marcus had been protective of his family's privacy. The children had created a remarkably homey living space in what had obviously been the building's former office area. Sleeping bags were arranged neatly in one corner, with small piles of belongings carefully organized beside each one. A camping lantern provided light, and Richard could see evidence of cooking facilities that consisted of a small camping stove and various containers for food storage. Most impressive was the workshop area that Marcus had established along one wall. A makeshift workbench held an array of tools, electronic components, and partially repaired items. The organization was meticulous, with everything sorted by type and size. Several completed projects sat on a nearby shelf. A radio, a small television, what appeared to be a gaming device, and various household items that had obviously been rescued from trash bins and restored to working condition. "This is incredible," Richard said, genuinely amazed by what the children had accomplished. "How long have you been living here?" 8 months, Marcus replied, still watchful but beginning to relax slightly. "We left our last foster home when they were going to split us up. I couldn't let that happen." "Where are your parents?" "Dead," Marcus said simply. "Car accident 3 years ago. We've been in the system ever since, but they kept moving us around, and the last place—" Marcus's voice trailed off, but Richard could see the pain in the boy's eyes. "So, you decided to take care of them yourself?" "Someone had to?" Marcus replied with a shrug that tried to appear casual but didn't quite succeed in hiding the weight of responsibility he had assumed. Richard walked over to Marcus's workshop area, examining the tools and assess projects with growing amazement. "Where did you learn to do all this?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "I just always could figure out how things worked. Even when I was little, I was the one who fixed everyone's toys and stuff." Richard picked up a small electronic device that he recognized as a portable gaming system, though it had obviously been extensively modified. "What did you do to this?" Marcus's face lit up with enthusiasm as he began explaining the modifications he had made to improve the device's performance and add features that hadn't been included in the original design. As he talked, Richard found himself increasingly amazed by the depth of the boy's understanding of electronics, mechanics, and engineering principles. Marcus had not only learned to repair devices, he had begun to improve upon their original designs, displaying an intuitive grasp of complex concepts that many professional engineers struggled to master. "Marcus," Richard said when the boy had finished his explanation, "what you've shown me here is extraordinary. You have abilities that most adults never develop, and you're using them not just to survive, but to take care of your family. I've never met anyone quite like you." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I just do what I have to do." That's exactly what makes it remarkable, Richard replied. Most people do only what they have to do for themselves. You've taken responsibility for 3 other people, and you're succeeding at it. That takes courage, intelligence, and character that are extremely rare. Richard paused, considering how to present the idea that had been forming in his mind since he had first witnessed Marcus helping Mrs. Patterson. I have a proposition for you, but I want you to understand that it comes with no strings attached, and you're free to say no without any consequences. Marcus tensed slightly, his wariness returning. What kind of proposition? I want to help you and your siblings get off the streets, but I want to do it in a way that keeps your family together and recognizes your extraordinary abilities. Richard pulled out his business card and handed it to Marcus. I run a technology company, and I'm always looking for talented people. What I'd like to offer you is a chance to develop your skills while ensuring that you and your siblings have a safe, stable home. Marcus looked at the business card, reading Richard's name and title with obvious surprise. You want to give me a job? Eventually, yes. But first, I want to make sure you and your siblings are safe and have access to the education and resources you deserve. I'm talking about finding you a place to live, getting the children enrolled in school, and providing you with opportunities to develop your technical abilities with proper training and equipment. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to process the implications of Richard's offer. Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us. I know enough, Richard replied. I know that you risked your own safety to help a stranger who needed assistance. I know that you've been taking care of 3 younger children for 8 months, under circumstances that would break most adults. I know that you have technical abilities that are genuinely extraordinary. Most importantly, I know that you're exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. The sound of voices outside indicated that Marcus's siblings were returning from their dinner trip. Marcus immediately moved toward the door, his protective instincts activated by the presence of a stranger in their home. Luna, Diego, Sophia, Marcus called out as the 3 children approached the entrance. We have a visitor. His name is Mr. Blackwood, and he's here to talk to us about something important. The 3 children entered cautiously, clustering around Marcus as they examined Richard with the careful assessment of young people who had learned not to trust adult strangers too quickly. Richard was struck by how healthy and well cared for they appeared, despite their obviously difficult circumstances. Luna, the oldest girl, had an air of premature maturity that reminded Richard of Marcus, while Diego projected protectiveness toward his younger sister that spoke well of the values Marcus had instilled in his siblings. Little Sophia, despite everything she had experienced, retained the bright curiosity of a normal 6-year-old, though she stayed close to Marcus's side. This is Luna, Diego, and Sophia, Marcus said, introducing his siblings with obvious pride. They're the reason I do everything I do. Richard knelt down to Sophia's level, speaking gently. It's very nice to meet all of you. Marcus has told me what a good job he's been doing taking care of everyone. Sophia looked up at Marcus for approval before responding. Marcus fixes everything, she said with the absolute confidence that only a young child can possess. He fixed my doll when her arm came off, and he makes the radio play music for us at night. He sounds like a very special big brother, Richard replied, glancing up at Marcus with a smile. Over the next hour, Richard explained his proposal to all 4 children, taking care to address their concerns and make sure they understood that any decision would be theirs to make collectively. He described his idea of finding them a safe place to live, getting the younger children enrolled in school, and providing Marcus with opportunities to develop his technical skills through mentorship and training programs. Luna, who had clearly assumed a co-leadership role in the family, asked pointed questions about the details of Richard's offer. What if we don't like it? What if the people you find to take care of us aren't nice to us? What if they try to separate us? Richard appreciated her directness and addressed each concern seriously. First, any arrangement we make will include legal protections to ensure that you 4 stay together as a family. Second, I'm not talking about placing you with strangers. I'm talking about finding you your own place to live, with Marcus officially recognized as your guardian, and with support services to help you succeed. Third, if at any point you're unhappy with the arrangement, we'll work together to find a better solution. Diego, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. Are you rich? Richard smiled at the boy's directness. Yes, I am. Why do you want to help us? Rich people don't usually care about kids like us. The question hit Richard with unexpected force, because it touched on motivations that he was still fully exploring himself. You're right that many wealthy people don't get involved in situations like yours, he replied honestly. But watching Marcus help that lady today reminded me of something important. The most valuable things in life aren't money or possessions, they're the connections we make with other people and the good we do in the world. Marcus showed me something real today, something that reminded me why those things matter. Marcus had been listening to this entire exchange with growing amazement. The idea that someone with Richard's resources and influence would be willing to help them seemed almost too good to be true, but something in the man's manner convinced him that the offer was genuine. If we said yes, Marcus asked carefully, what would happen next? Richard had been preparing for this question throughout their conversation. Tomorrow, I'd introduce you to my assistant Jennifer, who has experience with family services and child welfare issues. She would help us navigate the legal requirements for establishing Marcus as your official guardian. We'd also begin looking for appropriate housing, probably a small house or a large apartment in a good neighborhood with access to quality schools. What about Marcus? Luna asked. He's not old enough to be our guardian legally. That's true, Richard acknowledged. We'd need to work with the court system to establish a legal framework that recognizes Marcus's role while providing appropriate oversight and support. It's complicated, but it's not impossible, especially with the right legal assistance. Richard paused, then continued with the part of his proposal that he was most excited about. I'd also like Marcus to begin working with my company's research and development team. Not as a full-time employee, obviously, but as a consultant and apprentice. The abilities he's demonstrated are genuinely extraordinary, and I believe that with proper training and resources, he could contribute to projects that might change the world. Marcus stared at Richard in disbelief. You want me to work on real technology projects? I want you to do what you're already doing, but with better tools, proper training, and the support of some of the most talented engineers in the world, Richard replied. What you've accomplished here, living in an abandoned building with scavenged tools, is remarkable. Imagine what you could do with access to proper equipment and mentorship. The four siblings exchanged glances, communicating in the silent language that families develop over time. Finally, Marcus spoke for all of them. Can we have some time to think about it? Of course, Richard replied. This is a big decision, and you should take all the time you need. Here's my card with my personal phone number on it. Call me when you're ready to talk more, or if you have any questions. As Richard prepared to leave, Sophia tugged on his coat sleeve. When he knelt down to her level, she whispered, Are you going to make sure Marcus doesn't have to worry so much anymore? The question nearly brought tears to Richard's eyes, both because of its innocent directness and because of what it revealed about the burden Marcus had been carrying. Yes, sweetheart, he replied softly. That's exactly what I want to do. After Richard left, the four siblings sat in their makeshift living room, the camping lantern casting dancing shadows on the warehouse walls as they discussed the most important decision of their young lives. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility that had become his constant companion over the past April. 8 months, knowing that whatever choice they made would determine not just his future, but the futures of the 3 people he loved most in the world. Do you trust him? Luna asked, her 10-year-old wisdom often surprising Marcus with its depth. Marcus considered the question carefully. I think so. There was something about the way he talked to Sophia, the way he listened to your questions. He didn't talk down to us or act like we were just kids who didn't understand anything. Diego, who had been unusually quiet during Richard's visit, finally voiced the concern that had been troubling him. What if it's too good to be true? What if he changes his mind? Or what if we mess it up somehow? It was a fear that Marcus understood completely, because he had been thinking the same thing. Their experience with the foster care system had taught them that adults often made promises they didn't keep, that circumstances could change without warning, and that children like them had very little control over their own destinies. We've been doing okay on our own, Marcus said slowly. We've proven we can take care of ourselves. If Mr. Blackwood's offer doesn't work out, we'll still have each other, and we'll still have the skills and knowledge we've learned. Sophia, who had been playing with a small electronic toy that Marcus had repaired for her, looked up from her game. "I liked him," she announced with the simple certainty that only young children possess. "He had nice eyes, and he didn't look at our house like it was yucky." Over the next 3 days, the siblings continued to discuss Richard's proposal, weighing the potential benefits against the risks of trusting their future to someone they barely knew. Marcus found himself torn between his natural caution, developed through months of protecting his family on the streets, and his growing excitement about the possibilities that Richard's offer represented. On the morning of the 4th day, Marcus made his decision. Using a payphone at a nearby convenience store, he dialed Richard's TAS personal number. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Marcus. We've talked about your offer, and we'd like to try it." Richard's relief and excitement were audible through the phone. "I'm so glad, Marcus. I promise you won't regret this decision. Can you meet me this afternoon? I'd like you to meet Jennifer, my assistant, and we can begin making the arrangements we discussed." That afternoon, Marcus left his siblings in Luna's capable care and made his way to the downtown office building that housed Blackwood Innovations. As he rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, Marcus tried to process the surreal nature of his situation. 4 days ago, he had been a homeless boy surviving on the streets by fixing broken items for spare change. Now, he was about to enter the corporate headquarters of a multi-billion-dollar technology company as a BIA, potential consultant and apprentice. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the Chicago skyline, while modern furniture and subtle lighting created an atmosphere of sophisticated professionalism. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, greeted him warmly. "You must be Marcus," she said. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. I'm Sarah, and I've heard wonderful things about you." Marcus was led through a series of corridors lined with awards, patents, and photographs documenting the company's growth and achievements. Engineers and designers worked in open-concept spaces filled with cutting-edge equipment, their conversations mixing technical jargon with creative problem-solving that reminded Marcus of his own approach to fixing complex problems. Richard's office was spacious but not ostentatious, with one wall devoted to whiteboards covered in technical diagrams, and another featuring photographs of various company projects and achievements. Richard stood as Marcus entered, his smile genuine and welcoming. "Marcus, I'm so pleased you decided to move forward with this," Richard said, shaking the boy's hand with the same respect he would show to any business colleague. "I'd like you to meet Jennifer Walsh, who's going to help us navigate the legal and practical aspects of your situation." Jennifer was a woman in her early 40s, with the efficient manner of someone accustomed to solving complex problems. She had obviously been briefed on Marcus's circumstances, because she immediately began discussing the steps necessary to establish legal guardianship and secure appropriate housing for the 4 siblings. "The first priority is getting you into stable housing," Jennifer explained, pulling out a folder filled with documents and information. "I've identified several options that would provide adequate space for your family while keeping you in a good school district. We'll also need to work with family court to establish Marcus's legal status as guardian, which will require some paperwork and probably a court hearing, but it's definitely achievable." Richard leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. "I want you to understand, Marcus, that none of this is conditional on your working with our company. Your family's security comes first, regardless of any other arrangements we might make." Marcus felt a wave of relief at this clarification, because he had been worried that his family's welfare might depend on his ability to perform satisfactorily in a work environment that was completely foreign to him. "Thank you," he said simply. "However," Richard continued with a smile, "I am very excited about the possibility of having you work with our research and development team. I'd like to show you our labs and introduce you to some of our engineers. I think you'll find that what we're working on might interest you." Richard led Marcus through a series of laboratories and workshops that made the boys' makeshift workspace in the abandoned warehouse seem primitive by comparison. Computer-controlled manufacturing equipment created precision components, while engineers used advanced software to design and test new technologies. In one lab, a team was working on miniaturized sensors that could monitor environmental conditions while another group was developing new types of batteries that could store more energy in smaller spaces. What impressed Marcus most was not just the sophistication of the equipment, but the collaborative nature of the work environment. Engineers from different specialties worked together on complex problems, sharing knowledge and building on each other's ideas in ways that reminded him of his own instinctive approach to problem solving. In the main research lab, Richard introduced Marcus to Dr. Sarah Chen, the company's chief technology officer. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 30s whose enthusiasm for technology was immediately apparent as she began explaining some of the projects her team was working on. "Richard tells me you have an intuitive understanding of how mechanical and electronic systems work," Dr. Chen said to Marcus. "I'd love to see what you think of this project we're struggling with." She led Marcus to a workbench where several engineers were examining a small device that appeared to be malfunctioning. "This is a prototype sensor array that's designed to monitor air quality in urban environments," Dr. Chen explained. "The individual sensors work perfectly, but when we integrate them into the complete system, we get interference patterns that degrade the accuracy of the readings." Marcus examined the device carefully, his trained eye immediately beginning to analyze the problem. He could see that the various sensor components were positioned in a way that created electromagnetic interactions between their circuits, causing the interference that was plaguing the engineers. "I think the problem might be in how the sensors are positioned relative to each other," Marcus said tentatively, not wanting to presume too much expertise in his first encounter with the company's technical team. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest. "What do you see?" Marcus pointed to specific components within the device, explaining his theory about the electromagnetic interference and suggesting a different arrangement that might eliminate the problem. The engineers listened with growing amazement as this 12-year-old boy correctly identified issues that had been puzzling them for weeks. "That's brilliant," one of the engineers said. "We've been so focused on the individual sensor performance that we didn't consider the system-level interactions." Dr. Chen quickly sketched Marcus's suggested modifications on a nearby whiteboard, and within minutes the team was implementing his recommendations. When they tested the modified device, the interference problems disappeared completely, and the sensor array performed exactly as designed. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with genuine amazement, "what you just did would have taken our team weeks to figure out. You saw the solution immediately." Richard, who had been watching this interaction with growing excitement, felt his initial assessment of Marcus's abilities being confirmed and exceeded. This wasn't just a bright kid with good mechanical instincts. This was someone with genuine genius-level problem-solving abilities. Over the next several hours, Richard and his team showed Marcus through various departments of the company, introducing him to different types of engineering challenges and getting his perspective on problems that the professional staff was working to solve. In every case, Marcus's fresh viewpoint and intuitive understanding of complex systems provided insights that impressed the experienced engineers. As the afternoon drew to a close, Richard and Marcus returned to the executive office to discuss the practical arrangements for Marcus's new life. Jennifer had been busy during their lab tour, making phone calls and setting appointments that would begin the process of establishing legal guardianship and securing housing for the 4 siblings. "I found a house that I think will be perfect for your family," Jennifer announced, showing Marcus photographs of a modest but well-maintained 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from Bray, downtown. "It's in an excellent school district, and the rent is well within the budget we've established for your living expenses." Marcus looked at the photographs with amazement. The house had a small front yard, a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine, and bedrooms that were larger than the entire space his family currently occupied in the warehouse. "This is for us. This is for you," Richard confirmed, "along with a monthly allowance that will cover all your living expenses, plus additional funds for clothing, school supplies, and anything else your siblings need." "What about my work with the company?" Marcus asked. Richard smiled. "I'd like you to spend 2 afternoons a week in our labs, working with different engineering teams and contributing to whatever projects interest you most. Dr. Chen has already volunteered to be your primary mentor, and several other department heads have expressed interest in working with you. You'll also have access to our technical library and training resources," Dr. Chen added. We can set up online courses in advanced mathematics, physics, and engineering that will help you develop the theoretical knowledge to complement your intuitive abilities. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being offered to him. Just a week ago, his biggest concern had been earning enough money to buy his siblings dinner. Now he was being offered opportunities that he had never imagined possible. "There's one more thing," Richard said, his tone becoming more serious. "I want you to understand that this isn't charity. What you demonstrated today in our labs proves that you have abilities that are genuinely valuable to our company. The compensation we're providing is an investment in your development, because I believe that over time, your contributions will far exceed anything we're giving you now." Marcus nodded, understanding the importance of this distinction. Richard wasn't offering him a handout, but rather recognizing his potential value and investing in his future development. That evening, Marcus returned to the warehouse with news that would change his family's life forever. Luna, Diego, and Sofia listened with growing excitement as he described the house they would soon call home, the schools they would attend, and the opportunities that lay ahead for all of them. "Are you sure this is real?" Luna asked, voicing the question that all of them were thinking. "I saw the house," Marcus replied. "I met the people I'll be working with. Mr. Blackwood and Jennifer showed me all the legal documents. It's real." Sofia clapped her hands with delight. "Will I have my own room?" "You'll have your own room, and Diego will have his own room, and Luna will have her own room," Marcus confirmed, smiling at his little sister's excitement. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Jennifer orchestrated the complex process of transitioning the 4 siblings from homelessness to stability. Legal documents were filed, court appearances were scheduled, and arrangements were made for the children's enrollment in their new schools. Marcus found himself caught between excitement and anxiety as he prepared to assume a role he had never imagined possible. The technical challenges he would face at Blackwood Innovations were exciting, but the responsibility of ensuring his siblings' successful transition to normal life weighed heavily on him. On the day they moved into their new house, Marcus stood in the front yard watching as Luna, Diego, and Sofia explored their new home with the wonder of children who had never had a stable place to call their own. Each room represented possibilities that had been unimaginable just weeks before. Sofia's bedroom with space for toys and books, Diego's room where he could display his collection of found treasures, Luna's room where she could finally have privacy and space to pursue her own interests. Richard had come to witness their move-in day, bringing with him a housewarming gift that left Marcus speechless. A fully equipped workshop in the garage, complete with professional-grade tools, electronic testing equipment, and workbenches that made his abandoned warehouse setup look primitive by comparison. "I thought you might want to continue working on your own projects," Richard explained as Marcus examined the workshop with awe. "The work you do at the company is important, but your personal creativity is equally valuable." That first night in their new home, as Marcus lay in his own bed for the first time in 8 months, he reflected on the remarkable series of events that had brought them to this point. It had all started with a simple decision to help an elderly woman whose wheelchair had broken down. A moment of kindness that had taken less than 10 minutes of his time, but had somehow attracted the attention of someone who would change their lives forever. Marcus's first official day at Blackwood Innovations began with a comprehensive orientation that introduced him to the company's various departments and ongoing projects. Dr. Chen had prepared a special program that would allow him to rotate through different engineering teams, spending time with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, software developers, and materials scientists. His first assignment was with a team working on developing more efficient solar panels, a project that combined materials science with electrical engineering in ways that fascinated Marcus. The team was struggling with a problem involving the optimal arrangement of photovoltaic cells to maximize energy capture while minimizing manufacturing costs. Marcus spent several days observing the team's work, learning about the underlying science of solar energy conversion while absorbing the technical vocabulary and analytical methods that professional engineers used. His questions were insightful, often highlighting assumptions that the team had made without fully considering their implications. On his 4th day with the solar panel team, Marcus made a suggestion that would become his first significant contribution to the company's research efforts. He had noticed that the team was focusing on optimizing the performance of individual cells without fully considering how the cells interacted with each other when arranged in larger arrays. What if the problem isn't with the cells themselves, but with how they're connected? Marcus asked during a team meeting. I've been thinking about the electrical pathways between cells, and I wonder if there might be a more efficient way to route the connections. The lead engineer, Dr. Rodriguez, was initially skeptical of suggestions from a 12-year-old, but Dr. Chen encouraged him to listen to Marcus's complete proposal. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined a connection scheme that would reduce energy losses while simplifying the manufacturing process. The team spent the following week testing Marcus's suggested modifications, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The new connection design improved overall panel efficiency by nearly 8% while reducing manufacturing complexity significantly. Marcus, Dr. Rodriguez said as the team reviewed their test results, "This is the kind of breakthrough we've been trying to achieve for months. How did you see this when the rest of us missed it?" Marcus shrugged with characteristic modesty. "I just looked at it like a big circuit instead of a bunch of separate pieces. When you think about it that way, the connections become as important as the components." Word of Marcus's contribution to the solar panel project spread quickly through the company, establishing his reputation as someone whose insights could provide valuable perspectives on complex engineering challenges. Richard felt his initial assessment being validated in ways that exceeded even his optimistic projections. Meanwhile, Marcus's siblings were adjusting to their new lives with varying degrees of success. Luna had thrown herself into her studies with the enthusiasm of someone who had always been intellectually curious, but had never had access to quality educational resources. Her teachers were amazed by her quick grasp of advanced concepts and her mature approach to learning. Diego was initially more resistant to the structure of formal schooling, having grown accustomed to the freedom and self-reliance that street life had required. However, his protective instincts and natural leadership abilities made him popular with his classmates, and he gradually began to appreciate the opportunities that education could provide. Sophia adapted most easily to their new circumstances, with the resilience that young children often display when their basic needs for safety and security are finally met. She made friends quickly, threw herself into learning to read, and began displaying an artistic talent that had been impossible to nurture during their time in the warehouse. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself growing into his dual role as family guardian and technology consultant. The income from his work at Blackwood Innovations, combined with the support systems that Richard and Jennifer had established, provided a level of security that allowed him to focus on long-term planning rather than day survival. One evening, about 2 months after they had moved into their new home, Marcus was working in his garage workshop when Richard stopped by for one of his periodic check-in visits. Marcus was rebuilding the engine of a small motorcycle that he had purchased as a project, applying the principles he had learned in the company's engineering labs to understand internal combustion engines. "How are things going?" Richard asked, admiring Marcus's systematic approach to the motorcycle restoration. "Really well," Marcus replied, wiping grease from his hands. Luna made the honor roll at school, Diego joined the soccer team, and Sophia is reading at a level that's 2 years ahead of her grade. "And how are you doing?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I feel like I'm finally able to think about the future instead of just worrying about getting through each day. The work at the company is incredible. I'm learning so much, and I feel like I'm actually contributing something valuable." Richard nodded with satisfaction. "You are contributing something valuable. The solar panel design you developed is going into production next month, and preliminary estimates suggest it could reduce manufacturing costs by 15% while improving performance. That's not a small achievement, Marcus." Unquote. "Dr. Chen says there might be patent applications for some of the work I've been doing," Marcus said with a mixture of pride and amazement. "There definitely will be," Richard confirmed. "And when those patents generate licensing revenue, you'll receive a significant portion of those funds. By the time you're 18, you'll have enough money saved to pay for college at any university you choose, with plenty left over for your siblings' education as well." Marcus set down his tools and looked directly at Richard. "I need to ask you something that's been bothering me." "Of course. Why did you really do all this for us? I mean, I understand what you've told me about recognizing potential and wanting to help, But there must be hundreds of kids in this city who need help. Why us? Why us? Richard was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer a question that touched on motivations he was still fully exploring himself. Do you remember what you told me the first day we met in the warehouse? When I asked why you took care of your siblings, you said someone had to. That phrase has stayed with me every day since then. Richard paused, then continued. Most people, when they encounter a problem that isn't their responsibility, they walk away. They assume someone else will handle it. Or they convince themselves that there's nothing they can do to help. But you saw 3 children who needed protection, and you decided that someone had to take care of them, so it might as well be you. That's different, Marcus protested. They're my family. Is it different? Richard asked. When you helped Mrs. Patterson with her wheelchair, she wasn't your family. When you fix things for people on the street, they're not your family. You see problems that need solving, and you solve them, regardless of whether you have any obligation to get involved. Richard walked over to examine the motorcycle engine that Marcus had been working on. I had been successful in business because I learned to recognize valuable opportunities that other people overlook. But success also taught me that having resources creates responsibilities. When I saw you help that elderly woman, and then discovered your situation with your siblings, I realized I was looking at an opportunity to make a real difference in the world. But you're taking a big risk, Marcus pointed out. What if I don't live up to your expectations? What if the investment doesn't pay off? Richard smiled. Marcus, you've already exceeded every expectation I had. The work you're doing at the company is valuable, but that's not the most important thing you've accomplished. What do you mean? Look around you, Richard said, gesturing toward the house. 6 months ago, 4 children were living in an abandoned warehouse, with no adult protection, and no prospects for the future. Now Luna is excelling in school and talking about becoming a doctor. Diego has discovered that he has leadership abilities and wants to study business. Sophia is thriving in ways that wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't kept your family together. Richard paused, his voice becoming more serious. You didn't just survive a terrible situation, Marcus. You found a way to create stability and hope for 3 other people who were depending on you. That's not just impressive, it's inspiring. As autumn turned to winter, Marcus continued to divide his time between his responsibilities at home and his growing role at Blackwood Innovations. His contributions to various engineering projects had established him as a valuable team member, and several department heads had begun requesting his input on particularly challenging problems. One project that particularly captured Marcus's imagination involved developing assistive technologies for people with disabilities. Dr. Chen had introduced him to a team working on advanced prosthetic devices, and Marcus's mechanical intuition proved especially valuable in designing mechanisms that could replicate the complex movements of human joints. The biggest challenge, explained Dr. Martinez, the lead engineer on the prosthetics project, is creating devices that are both sophisticated enough to provide natural movement and simple enough to be reliable in daily use. Marcus spent several weeks studying existing prosthetic designs, learning about the biomechanics of human movement, and observing how current devices failed to meet users' needs. His background in repairing complex mechanisms with simple tools gave him a unique perspective on the balance between functionality and reliability. His breakthrough came when he suggested approaching prosthetic design from the perspective of modular components that could be easily maintained and replaced by users themselves, rather than requiring professional servicing for every adjustment or repair. What if we designed a prosthetic like a piece of electronic equipment that users could troubleshoot and maintain themselves? Marcus proposed during a team meeting. Most of the problems people have with current prosthetics are simple mechanical issues that could be fixed with basic tools if the devices were designed with user maintenance in mind. The team initially resisted this approach, arguing that prosthetic devices needed to be sealed and protected from user modification to ensure safety and reliability. But Marcus persisted, drawing on his experience with his siblings and other homeless individuals who had learned to maintain complex equipment without professional support. People take care of things better when they understand how they work, Marcus argued. If prosthetic users could perform basic maintenance themselves, they'd have more confidence in their devices and better outcomes. Overall, Dr. Martinez was eventually convinced to let Marcus develop a prototype based on his modular maintenance concept. The resulting design incorporated quick-release connectors, clearly labeled adjustment points, and diagnostic indicators that would help users identify and resolve common problems. When the prototype was tested with a group of volunteer prosthetic users, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Users appreciated being able to make adjustments and perform maintenance themselves, and the modular design actually proved to be more reliable than traditional sealed systems. This could revolutionize prosthetic design, Dr. Martinez told Marcus as they reviewed the test results. You've identified a fundamental flaw in how we've been approaching user interface design. The prosthetic project became Marcus's most significant contribution to Blackwood Innovations, earning him recognition not just within the company, but throughout the broader engineering community. Articles about the innovative design appeared in several technical journals, and Marcus found himself invited to speak at engineering conferences about his approach to user-centered design. As Marcus's 15th birthday approached, Richard reflected on the remarkable transformation he had witnessed over the past 3 years. The homeless boy who had fixed Mrs. Patterson's Patcherine wheelchair had evolved into a confident young engineer whose innovations were beginning to attract international attention. More importantly, Marcus's siblings had thrived in ways that validated every aspect of Richard's original decision to help them. Luna had been accepted into her high school's CAS advanced placement program and was already taking college-level courses in mathematics and science. Diego had discovered a talent for business and leadership, serving as student council president while maintaining excellent grades. Sophia had developed into a confident, creative child whose artistic abilities were being nurtured through special programs at school. On Marcus's birthday, Richard arranged for a celebration at the company's headquarters, where the entire research and development team gathered to recognize his contributions over the past 3 years. Dr. Chen presented him with a special award recognizing his innovative approach to engineering design, while Dr. Martinez announced that the prosthetic project had received approval for commercial development. 3 years ago, Richard said in his remarks to the assembled team, "I met a young man who was surviving on the streets by fixing broken things for spare change. What I discovered was someone who didn't just repair devices, but who understood how to make them work better than they had before." Richard paused, looking directly at Marcus. But the most remarkable thing about Marcus isn't his technical abilities, impressive as they are. It's his understanding that technology should serve people, that innovation should make life better for everyone, not just for those who can afford the latest gadgets. As the celebration continued around him, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this point. The decision to help Mrs. Patterson with her wheelchair had seemed like such a small thing at the time. Just another opportunity to use his skills to help someone in need. He could never have imagined that those few minutes of kindness would lead to opportunities that had transformed not just his life, but the lives of his siblings. Later that evening, as the family gathered for a quiet birthday dinner at home, Marcus looked around the table at Luna, Diego, and Sophia, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had brought them together to this moment. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family with a future full of possibilities. "Make a wish," Sophia said, as Marcus prepared to blow out the candles on his birthday cake. Marcus closed his eyes and made his wish, not for himself, but for continued opportunities to use his abilities to help others, to create technologies that would make the world a better place, and to ensure that his siblings would always have the support they needed to pursue their own dreams. As he blew out the candles, Marcus realized that his wish had already been granted in ways he was still discovering. The homeless boy who had once fixed broken things for spare change had found his true calling, creating solutions that would help thousands of people while building a life that honored the values of compassion and service that had guided him from the very beginning. The story that had begun with a broken wheelchair and a moment of kindness had evolved into something far greater than anyone could have imagined, proving that the most important innovations often come not from laboratories or boardrooms, but from the simple human impulse to help others when they need it most. Years later, when Marcus had become a recognized leader in assistive technology design, and his siblings had each found their own paths to success, He would often return to that moment on Michigan Avenue when he had first encountered Mrs. Patterson. He would remember the dozens of people who had walked past her without stopping. And he would understand that the choice to help had been the most important decision of his life, not because of the rewards it had brought, but because it had revealed the kind of person he wanted to be. In the end, Richard's investment in Marcus and his siblings had paid dividends that extended far beyond any financial return. The homeless boy who had fixed a broken wheelchair had grown into a man whose innovations would help millions of people live better lives, whose leadership would inspire a new generation of engineers to consider the human impact of their work, and whose example would demonstrate that extraordinary potential can be found in the most unexpected places, waiting only for someone with the wisdom to recognize it and the courage to nurture it. The transformation was complete, but the story continued as Marcus carried forward the lessons learned during those desperate months on the streets. That everyone deserves help when they need it, that small acts of kindness can have profound consequences, and that the most valuable innovations are those that serve the most vulnerable members of society. From a broken wheelchair to a life-changing opportunity, from homelessness to hope, from survival to success. The journey had proven that sometimes the most important thing any of us can do is simply notice when someone needs help, and then be brave enough to provide it.